So, a vital instrument to finding our way into the future is being able to discern what God wants us to do. That was the basis of the Vitalities Team foundation to a 5-year plan. We need a guide. In discerning God's will. And the team's report establishes a framework to discern God's will for our community. God is our life. God is our support. God is our guiding shepherd. And it is vital for us to know what God expects of us and where God wants us to go as a church. So, I have already addressed the executive summary part. Reverend Mike will now talk about number 2, the needs-oriented evangelism.
Needs-oriented evangelism, or really needs-oriented outreach. Pilgrim has always looked for need in this surrounding area and worked to address it. Our plan calls for needs-oriented evangelism or needs-oriented outreach, and that is nothing new for the people of Pilgrim Church. Pilgrim's outreach is both to people in need, but also we outreach to those who have the ability and the gifts and the calling to address needs, all needs, physical, emotional, spiritual, and others. God has called us to this place for a reason and has established this church as a significant resource to empower ministry. One of the first questions the Vitality team asked when preparing the 5-year plan was the question of location. Where does God want Pilgrim Church to be? And we believe, at least in this moment, that God has called us to this place for a reason. And in fact, for many reasons. Maybe someday God will ask us to up and leave, to up and move to another spot. The planning team, however, discerned that that day has not yet come. God placed a hospital near here for a reason. This is a place of healing surrounded by many wounds. The hospital is for physical wounds mostly. Our church is for spiritual wounds mostly. Our church is a place where we discuss our spiritual needs, where we discover each other's needs and the needs of this community, and where we do our best to deal with them. Our needs-based outreach, or our needs-based evangelism, must maintain its spiritual focus while not ignoring any needs. Our plan is to continue to improve our mission and spiritual growth to become a care center for the spiritually wounded, a builder of community, and a center of social justice and service. Indeed, that's what we already are. Pastor.
Number 3, empowering leadership. Leadership is vital in any community, but leadership does not rest on the shoulders of a few. Every person is a leader in some way. We understand leadership in a broad sense to be every person using their God-given gifts and abilities. But many people are unaware or in denial of what their God-given gifts and abilities are. We need to see the gifts others have and encourage them to use them. We need to be a community of encouragers. We need to encourage each other to personally grow and develop in their faith, their God-given gifts, and their abilities. There was a shy woman in my first church who told me after her second term of being the chairperson of the diaconate board that if I had not encouraged her, if I had not seen gifts that she could not see about herself, that she would never have considered being even on the diaconate board, let alone being the chairperson. And she was a good member of the board and a good chairperson. Gifts.
Gift-oriented ministry. While our 5-year plan outlines a ministry based on people's needs, we have to accept the fact that we can't meet all of them. The needs in this neighborhood are many. How does God tell us which needs need to be addressed? Well, first, God informs us through the people and the gifts that God provides this community. If God wants a soup kitchen here, we will know, because there will be several people who will come forward with those gifts that permit such a ministry to move forward. We will continue to work on developing the gifts that God has already given us. Gifts are tools, and as such become outdated if not used. This plan therefore calls for identifying such gifts, as Pastor Peter mentioned, and to create a garden where spiritual gifts can grow and bear fruit for God's kingdom, for this community.
Number 5, passionate spirituality. God is the source of our lives and of our strength. God is our beginning and our end, and we can do nothing without God. The love of God needs to be the center point of our lives. Seeking God's presence is vital to life and living. As a church, we labor in vain if we are not grounded in the loving presence of God. And if we rely on our own efforts and energy alone, we will grow tired, we will grow disillusioned, we will be disappointed, and we will become bitter. We need to seek and follow the Good Shepherd. The greatest commandment is to love God with our whole heart, with our whole being. We must continually seek to grow closer to God and to know God deeper. Without this desire to be with God, the church stagnates and it dies.
And another word about passionate spirituality. Passionate spirituality also forces us to deal with the fact that each person in this community is both on the same path, being a part of this community, but also on their own individual path as well. And we need to foster both. The people of this church also carry the spirituality of this church with them everywhere they go. We must continue to discern what direction the winds of spirit and the winds of love blow, so that we can be ready with our hearts open for the transforming love of Jesus Christ, even into the most unexpected places. The next item is functional structures. And these are the structures that are included in our bylaws, the various committees. And our church has a number of functional structures, some that are included in our bylaws, some that are not. And we must be ready to change our structure as our ministries change over time. This requires an honest evaluation and a willingness to eliminate teams and ministries that are no longer needed or that we no longer have the people or the gifts to support. To some, this might look like we're dying because we can't support all the same ministries in the same ways that we always have. But it's not a sign of death, not at all, but a sign of change. We must be ready to prune our structure and our ministries, to right-size them, so we're not too big or too small for the task at hand. Pruning is needed for a healthy garden. It's sad, however, when the branch you've been sitting on has got to go. But be aware, pruning is a huge part of preparing for the future. If we don't prune, we're going to wear ourselves out. We'll be tired and even cynical. We don't want that. Ideally, our workload, we are a volunteer structure here, our workload and structure will be a little less than what we can comfortably handle, rather than a little more, which is what we've had. We've always tried to do a little more, haven't we? Always try to do a little more than what we really can do. And we feel called by God to do that, but we need to rethink that a little bit because we are in a time of change. And having the ability to have a little more time planned than what we actually need will facilitate our joy in doing our ministries, while positioning us for new ministries as God brings new ministers, new people into service and spiritual growth here at this church.
Number 7, inspiring worship services. To inspire means to breathe in the Spirit. We come to worship to breathe in the Spirit of God. There are many ways we might breathe in the Spirit of God. Some find the music in one or more of its offerings to be inspiring. Some find it in prayer and meditation. Some find it in the Scriptures and even in the sermons. But one thing is certain. If you are not open to receive the Spirit of God, you will not breathe in the Spirit, no matter what form of inspiration is offered to you. If you think that worship is a passive experience, where those of us who are up here in the chancel are performers for your entertainment, you're mistaken. God is the only audience here who we are all performing for. Worship is about giving God our thanks and our praise. We are all involved in worship. And I know that you all want to be refreshed and renewed. You want to receive strength for facing the week that's coming up ahead. These are the byproducts of participating in worship. We up here will strive to make things that we do and say meaningful and inspiring. But you have to breathe it in and live it out in your lives. For guests at our church, we need to remember that worship is most often their first impression of us, when we should strive to make a very good impression.
In addition to our functional structures, our plan calls for holistic small groups. So what is a holistic small group? Well, realistically, when we looked at all the things that you folks are doing, we discovered that many of our ministries are small groups of people who spontaneously gather around a specific need or issue. And when the need or issue passes, the small group naturally disbands. In this time of great change, we don't want to have to update our bylaws every time a new opportunity comes along. Instead, we want to be able to respond as quickly as God's will is revealed to us. We'll therefore encourage and support small group ministries. If you want to deal with a local need or an international need, you don't need the approval of the whole church. What you do need is a small group of people to work with, to get it done. This is how great ministries grow, organically, when people are moved by the Spirit towards a need in love and in peace.
Number 9 is loving relationships. The greatest commandments are to love God and to love your neighbor. Our primary loving relationship is with God. Beyond that, it is vital to love our neighbors in the church. The church needs to be a place where people are accepted for who they are. The church needs to be an inclusive environment where all people are accepted as a child of God. This is not just tolerating each other, but rather our relationships in the church should be caring for one another and sincere concern about one another's well-being. Jesus is our example and our guide. Now, Numbers 2 through 9 are the 8 fundamental qualities of a healthy church. All 8 of these qualities are essential to a vital and growing church. We must have them. The last 3, 10 through 13, are important concerns for any future planning. So, Mike, seems appropriate for you to take the next one.
Yeah, I have a reputation for dealing with technology for some reason, so I want to talk about technology and social media just briefly. It's a new area of ministry that's developing because there are shifts in how people connect and communicate with each other. This shift is being driven by new technology in many ways, particularly the internet. For example, if someone new wants to learn about Pilgrim, they are far more likely to visit our webpage first before they visit our church. We'll therefore continue to invest in technology and social media to reach people wherever they are. Not just reach them, but also invite them into community. Community with us, with Jesus Christ, via technology, but also through small group, organic groups, ministry, worship, music, in any way that God calls them to join us. Also, I want to talk for a minute about the next item, financial planning and membership trends. It's an area, kind of the business side of the church. So we look carefully at our financial and membership trends, and we found that Pilgrim is really doing amazingly well compared to most churches. Pilgrim is doing well in a very difficult time for Michigan when people are leaving our state, and a very difficult time for the Christian church as a whole. Under the leadership of Jesus Christ and your stewardship, Pilgrim has a very functional building, a reasonable endowment, and a spirit-filled congregation. While our membership numbers have declined, our giving in our ministries have stayed almost constant for the last 10 years. You can see there's details of this with graphs in copies of the 5-year plan that are out in the fellowship hall that you can get, or if you need more copies, you can let myself or Pastor Peter know. Take a look at them, read through them, ask questions. Keep in mind that in America, growth has traditionally been seen as an end unto itself. In the church, however, we need to be sensitive to God's plan. And God's plan has more to do with matching gifts to spiritual needs than it does growth just for growth's sake. Our plan is to continue our efforts to grow spiritually, as Pastor Peter said, to work for God's kingdom, and to celebrate in thankfulness our faith by trusting God. This is our purpose and our mission. And we will be as faithful as we can be to God's calling, both for each individual and for the community as a whole.
So, in conclusion, at least for today anyway, although we know we can know the general direction to have a vital and growing church, namely to go deeper in faith and wider in outreach, and we can know the essential or fundamental qualities that a church has to have in order to be a vital and growing church, namely the 8 qualities from natural church development, as we mentioned, numbers 2 through 9 in our list. We still have to discern and determine what specific programs and projects we are to do. And to this end, there are no step-by-step programs for a church to follow to have more vitality. 10 years ago, we didn't even have the information that we shared with you today. We know the overall direction and some general areas that have to be done, but the rest remains for each church, including our own, to figure out how to accomplish its own vitality and growth. That is why the Vitality team has emphasized that discerning God's will for us is essential. Nothing we plan and nothing we do will ever work without God's approval, support, and guidance. The slogan of the United Church of Christ is, God is still speaking. But the essential question we need to keep asking ourselves, are we listening? God may be speaking, but unless we're listening, God's words fall on deaf ears. We must seek out God's presence, then we must seek out God's will, and then we must listen for that still small voice, or perhaps that gut feeling that God often uses to prod us. We must discern what God wants us to do, and that discerning is something we must continually do. As Reverend Mike mentioned, though, sometimes, as in a vineyard, there must be some pruning done in order to make way for new growth. For example, we are scheduled to give up doing Meals on Wheels as a church by the end of the year. We scheduled to give up the chicken dinners unless someone comes forward who wants to organize another. When it comes to programs and means of outreach, Pilgrim is doing well. Time and again, at association and conference meetings I have attended, people have made suggestions of programs and new ministries, and 90% of the time we have either done the suggestion or we are doing it. So we continue to move forward. We have great resources, and we have each other and God to guide us. The Vitality team has provided a solid foundation from which our congregation can discern God's will and determine what ministries we need to do to meet God's desires of us. So we have a lot going for us, so let's get going.